Morning. I am beyond grateful that all of you choose to spend your this hour with us this morning, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation with such thoughtful and giving and sharing leaders in our community. Barb, if you can go to the next slide. So part of our community circles and conversation, just want to remind you the whole point of this hour together is to work and grow with one another in terms of building trusting relationships, sharing knowledge, resources, lessons learned, challenging one another to really just help the entire Central Iowa nonprofit sector. We want to find ways to find common goals and remain rooted in our collective community's vision to drive equity and inclusion, not just within the sector, but across the community. So, as I mentioned, the only real housekeeping item for all of you to be aware of course, is you're welcome to keep your video on, as I said, for both the presentation and the breakout rooms. And then, as you saw in the reminder, we do post these recordings for folks who can't make it to look back and to be part of the conversation later if that works better for them. So just be aware of that. And next slide, please, Sally. Or Barb, goodness. This morning, I was going to turn it over to Sally in a moment. We can see how much coffee I have not had yet this Wednesday. So today, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, I am, as I said, thrilled and so appreciative to have the opportunity to learn, listen, and explore challenges and successes with some of our colleagues in the arts and culture space and what that means to them and their organizations as they've really moved forward. Both a reflection back on the impact of the pandemic, but I think most even importantly, what they've learned and how they're helping to move their organizations and their missions forward. So we'll start off with Sally Dix, the Executive Director of Bravo Greater Des Moines, really looking at the impact of the arts and culture sector and how some of those lessons and certainly how some hopeful partnerships moving forward can really help our community in recovery and resiliency, of course. And then we've got David Kilpatrick and Kurt Simmons. David is the executive director of the Playhouse, and Kurt is the president and CEO of Science Center of Iowa. So many innovative things, so many thoughtful ways that they have led. And I know that you will take away something from their experiences, both as leaders and also as from their organizations, no matter what aspect of the nonprofit sector you are serving. So again, huge thank you to Kurt, Sally, and also to David. And with that, we will turn it over to Sally, and she's going to facilitate this conversation. And then about 9, 10 or so, if you can stick with us, we would love to break out into smaller groups, and we'll have a conversation about, where you've really found energy at this time, and then also what you're concerned about or what's really pulling at you these days, so we can imagine together some future programming or other resources the Community Foundation and our partners can bring to you. So Sally, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm so excited and again grateful for your time this morning.
Oh, so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the time and the space. The cultural sector, there's no question every sector has been impacted by the COVID pandemic, but there are some things that are a little bit unique maybe to the cultural sector, and then a lot of commonalities and a lot of ways to cross over. I'm delighted to have David and Kurt here, both who have been tremendously innovative and creative and are going to share some of their learnings. It's really important for everyone to know very few of our cultural organizations went dark. It wasn't like they just closed their doors for the last 18 months and are starting fresh. There was a lot of resiliency and a lot of innovation that went into redefining operating models. And so I'm excited to hear from Kurt and David. But before we talk about the look ahead, which I think is what we're all excited about, I do want to do a little framing for the look back, just so you have a sense of the landscape and how it did impact the cultural sector nationally and then in our state. If we could go to the next slide. Part of the reason that I think this is such an important thing for everyone to understand is hopefully everybody on this call embraces the role of arts and culture because of the creativity that it drives and the inspiration that it brings, and it just makes us feel good and happy. It's also really essential for all of you to know that this is a significant economic industry for our region. Annually, prior to the pandemic, the organizations, the nonprofit organizations Bravo was supporting, we're generating $185 million in annual economic impact. This is a significant engine for our region. We're very proud of the quality of life aspects, but it's not just like a nice to have sector. This is a critical way we're going to bring our community back online, is with the economy that the cultural sector drives. So and I'm like pushing my down arrow as if I can advance the slides, but I can't. So let's go to the next slide. Specific to the cultural sector, this is not a competition that anyone would want to win. Every sector was impacted by the pandemic, but there was no sector that was more negatively impacted than the leisure and hospitality industry, which includes arts and cultural experiences. And you can see that there was more than a 50% decline in the first 3 months of the pandemic in terms of employment rates, as those organizations did have to shut down and reimagine. And unfortunately, that is not bouncing back as quickly as some other industries. So first to go and sort of maybe in some cases towards the later side coming back. Next slide, please. What you're seeing here are some data about the financial impact, that $185 million industry. This data is actually from November, so it's a little bit dated even at this point. But the total financial impact because of the pandemic was nearly $40 million. That's just in the state of Iowa, nearly $40 million in the state of Iowa. 97% of organizations had to cancel events. 63% of organizations had to modify their operating status, meaning if they were live, they were going to a hybrid or an all virtual. And the number that just kills me is 3.5 million people did not get to experience arts and culture during the pandemic. And that's just heartbreaking because we know what value that brings for so many reasons. The graph you're seeing on the right is how severe you expect the impact to be. This was self-reported by the organization, and 57% responded that it would be extremely severe to their organization. What you're not seeing from this slide is that 8% of the organizations that responded to the survey actually said they did not think they were going to make it through. So if you do the math on the 70 organizations in our region that Bravo supports, and you take out 8% of them, that's 5, 6, 7 organizations that are not going to come through. And then you have to start thinking about which ones can we afford to lose? Which ones are we okay letting go? And I just don't think the answer there is a good one. So Bravo continues to do what we can to keep the sector strong, but it's going to take all of us. Next slide, please. And another thing that I think is really critical for everyone to understand is, again, arts and culture are not a separate sector. They are as integrated into everything that our community is trying to achieve as any other sector. I challenge you to come up with some cause or issue or initiative that adding a cultural perspective to doesn't make better. All of these things, mental health, public welfare, transportation, tourism, all of the things that we as a community are trying to achieve are amplified because of the role of arts and culture. So it's critical that we reimagine the sector, and it's critical that we find crossovers and intersections between the cultural landscape and all the work that other sectors are doing, because together we can do so much more, and our community will not come back unless we do it all together. Next slide. So the call to action before I turn it over is that we all have a responsibility to engage. And this isn't one of those things, I know that nobody on this call thinks this, but this isn't somebody else's problem. This isn't for the cultural sector to solve. This isn't for a different group of people to address. We need all of your thought leadership, all of you partners on this call to help re-engage with the cultural sector, attend, support, interact, and think of new ways. Think of new ways to partner and collaborate with the organizations, certainly the ones on the call. I see other faces on the call, but certainly the ones on the call today. But more broadly, I challenge all of you to expand your thinking about how you can work with the cultural sector to advance the really good work you're all trying to do, because I promise you there's overlap. So with that little bit of landscape, I think that's the end of my slides, and we can probably take that down so people's faces are bigger, unless Angie, there's some reason you want to keep the slides up. So, so with that, I want to open it up to hear from Kurt and David and let them set the stage for the experience that their organizations have had over the last 18 months. We'll start with a brief, I always think that before you figure out where you're going to go, you have to know where you are. So let's start with a quick update from Kurt and David about where their organizations are. And then we'll just talk about some of the innovations and some of the challenges and the opportunities. We'll keep it really conversational and open to questions. If anyone has questions, I'll try to follow the chat as well. So Kurt, why don't we start with you? And I know the Science Center has had highs and lows over the last 18 months and is coming into a very busy summer season, what is typically a very busy summer season. Why don't you set the stage for us? Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, it's a transition point. It's an inflection point for us to be transitioning from the realities of dealing with COVID and cutting back on our operations significantly, transitioning to what is typically a very busy season for us in the summer. And right now, for example, our summer camp registrations are running pretty close to normal years. So we expect to have a pretty full summer. We're currently open just 3 days a week to the public, Thursdays, Saturdays and Sundays. And during the summer, we plan to be open 5 days a week. So we're starting to transition to a more robust operating platform.
That's great, Kurt. I'm excited that the summer camps are booking up now. Are you starting to transition into, I want to say normal operations, but do you still have reduced capacity on those summer camps as well? Or are you sort of back to, you can do so much outside. You have such a great gift with all your programming. How are those starting to shape up?
We should be at normal capacity. We're able to use some unused spaces in the facility and expand. So we are still observing social distancing norms that have become norms today. So we plan to be at our full capacity. Our preschool is open and is full for the summer also. And we will continue operating that with reduced capacity in each classroom, but we've added a classroom so we have the same number of students overall. So it's actually really exciting to be looking forward to a summer that is starting to feel a little bit normal. Our attendance is picking up. Through most of the pandemic, we were at about 30% of our historic attendance numbers, which is pretty typical across the country. 20 to 30% of museum attendance of previous year's attendance is what people were expecting and experiencing. Lately, we've been hitting about 60% of our normal attendance. So that's a trend we all want to see, is increasing attendance and people feeling more comfortable getting out and exploring.
Yeah, well, that's tracking. We're watching hotel motel tax revenue and occupancy rates in hotels as well. And so we were at 25, 30%, and we're moving up to 45, 50, 60%, depending on what's happening. So I'm glad to see the trends are moving in that direction as well for attendance. David, you've had such a unique experience as a performing arts venue. Just as a reminder to everybody, we talk about the cultural sector, right? But of course, as there is in any sector, there's so much nuance and difference between what Kurt is able to do at a science center and what David is able to do at a performing arts center. And so it'll be interesting to hear. I know you've had a different experience, and perhaps even the look forward is a little bit different, David.
Well, actually, what's been interesting for us is finally being able to start making plans again. We were starting in the middle of March, or actually the late part of February, being able to think, hey, what's our summer? What could we do? And even now, in just about a week, we're going to announce what's coming in on our next full season. And I think that's been the greatest reward most recently, is the ability to look ahead I mean, all of us experience the idea of it's Monday and you're not even sure you could plan by Thursday what was really going to be happening this week. And so that part of it is nuts. We worked very hard to stay open in some fashion. Our numbers, the demand was not what we thought it would be, except for we take pride in touching lives one at a time. And so the people that came here really wanted to come, and we were very glad to be able to give them something to see. And so that was important to us all year long. In terms of this summer, we looked at what we did last summer, which was a sort of reactive response to the pandemic. Last year, we did a live drive-in theater, just trying to be creative to get people gathering again. This year, we said, let's do it better. We're going to do a tent, but it's still going to be outdoors, going to still be with all the fresh air, going to still be with some of the social distancing. And nobody's got a crystal ball clear enough to tell us what the status on masks is going to be. And I think that's something maybe we'll get to later, is that challenge of keeping current with what expectations are of your participants.
David, one of the things I know you have really worked hard at, Kurt as well, I'm sure everybody on this call, but is really keeping in touch with your users, right? And making sure that you are understanding what they're seeking, so that you can both be responsive, but also proactive to be out in front of what it is that they're looking for. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you've engaged your audiences and what kind of outreach you've done to start imagining what might be coming down the road? Because I know, there's a lot of survey fatigue. Are you getting the feedback that you want? How's it going from an audience feedback perspective?
Survey fatigue is very real. And yes, I myself personally can't stand one more survey, please. But no, it's a response. We do get some response to the surveys. Obviously, that's our more vocal participants. We also just happen to sit in the lobby and listen to people talk or express themselves. They recognize who we are and they say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm seeing. And we also look at them and we say, we're very proud of the fact we're fogging the theater. And then everybody comes out, we don't really care about that. We care about masks. And I will share with you anecdotally this one little story. We were very conscientious of bathrooms. One person in the bathroom at a time. We're going to clean the bathroom, but we tape doors shut and signs and everything. And we actually got more pushback on the fact that we went to gender neutral restrooms than the fact that we were, anything else that we had done in the building. So we said, fine, if that's what doesn't matter to you, we'll respond to that and react to that and give you what you meet your expectations. And so we opened up all the bathrooms and nobody has had a complaint whatsoever. So it's listening and guessing. And unfortunately, I will confess that guessing, we do guess wrong, but we're very fortunate we can react. Great, tomorrow we'll do it differently. We don't have to stick rigidly. This is the rule for forever. We just say, no problem, we'll adapt as we need to. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson that we've taken.
I think we've heard that on these calls and conversations with other nonprofit colleagues that nimble is a word that we're embracing in different ways. We never wanted to be the squirrel, but it turns out we all have to be able to turn on a dime and adapt as quickly as we can. Kurt, another interesting constituency in making some of these decisions about what lies ahead and certainly how you planned through the pandemic is your board of directors. How are you engaging them? They're not there on a day-to-day basis. They're not, as hands-on with the programming. And so how are you, if there's a different way or anything innovative that you're doing to make sure that they understand how it's not business as normal and the changes are real and probably going to stick around for a while? Tell us a little bit about your conversations with your board and how that's going.
Well, we were right up front from the beginning that we had a serious challenge in front of us. We had a staff reduction right when the pandemic hit. We're still building staff from that. But we put together a very detailed phased reopening plan, even though we didn't know where the virus was going to go and what was going to happen in the community. What we did was put together a series of increased levels of opening that would be kicked off by metrics that would be discussed with the board. So even though we had a full and detailed plan, we wouldn't kick off a new phase of opening until we engaged with the board. Board dynamics have changed. We're obviously focused more on financial security and where the money's going. We've been very stable and been able to cover that pretty well. I think one of the biggest challenges has been having to work virtually with the board. I've come to understand, just as we all do when we go out into the community, that being together is really important. And I have brand new board members. I've still been recruiting board members through this who are, they feel slighted that they haven't been able to sit down next to their peers around the board table and have that little chat and banter and get to know people, because that's part of why you work on a board. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, but our board communication has been very open. We have been very clear about what the challenges are. We've included the board in all levels of decision-making as far as the reopening goes. And I have great leadership on the board, so they've been very helpful every step of the way and very supportive.
It's so great, Kurt, because you talk about the metrics, and obviously the Science Center is in a great position to use science for metrics. And I think it's elevated in a lot of ways the role that your organization plays in providing that trusted resource for information. And I love that you've been able to adapt that and use that, with your board. It's interesting that you talk about that board engagement. I was just having this conversation with a couple of other nonprofits. Bravo, and you don't know Bravo's model, so this sounds worse than it is, but Bravo has had 14 new board members in the last 18 months for a variety of reasons. And it does sound a little bit worse than it is, but we have had, even with all that turnover, we've had 92–95% attendance at our meetings, but our engagement has been not 95%. And so one of the things we're talking about is, how do we begin to pivot back to in-person with this incredibly important audience, this board of directors? How do we begin to bring them back, knowing that a lot of them really love Bravo's board is obviously regional, knowing a lot of them don't have to travel downtown now. They don't even have to put on pants if they don't want to. So, how do we get them to want to come back to our table to reform those connections? And do we give up, 15% of them? If we want to bring them back, we're going to lose 15% of them, but do we get that back in the level of engagement around the table? And that's a really challenging decision, and we don't have it solved yet either. But I think the open communication and the metrics is really smart. That's a really good way to do it. David, how is your board engaging at the Playhouse? I know they maybe necessarily aren't as involved in the creative decisions about what the shows are, coming down the pike, but how are they supporting you as you're making decisions? What are some things that have really worked well?
Well, we've actually taken advantage of this opportunity because there's not this day-to-day concern. We have the finance committee that's watched us, engaged us a lot closer, just keeping us reports current and active, watching numbers. But the board then has actually stepped up to the level where boards really, you dream they would go, and that's at the strategic 30,000 foot level. We had a compliments of the Community Foundation. We got a little grant to support us in some strategic planning. And the purpose of the strategic planning is, what do we do post-COVID? Even in the middle of COVID, we're like, where do we start thinking ahead? And the board is like, okay, what can we do structurally that's more strategic and more guidance for the Playhouse, as opposed to staring at, did you sell enough tickets this week for the show? And so in that regard, I felt like we really have transformed into the board that we would all want, which is that leadership board as opposed to the management board. And so in that regard, I've been very pleased. I will share with you a side note, just going back to the Zoom, we had the same problem with rehearsals, with our casts rehearsing on Zoom. You can't conduct those side conversations. You can't walk to the drinking fountain and ask, hey, where are you from? What your parents do? What's your job? So you miss that development of connectivity that you get at in-person scenarios where there's board meetings, rehearsals, or just any congregation of people. And that's the part that Zoom didn't solve for us, even though it did solve the attendance problem. So.
Yeah, it all seems like you gain, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. You hope it's 2 steps forward, half a step backward, but it doesn't, it just doesn't always work that way. And of course, we're all learning as we go. None of us have ever done this. You've never rehearsed a show over Zoom, so you don't know how that's going to go. And one other really important constituency I want to touch on briefly is your staff and how you are keeping them energized. If that's even, I would say with a lowercase e, if you could even keep them lowercase e energized, that would be a win. I know these have been long, hard, dark months for a variety of reasons. Tell us a little bit, maybe David, start with you, about how you're bringing your team along and how you're providing support for them and communicating with them, and how you're frankly helping them pivot to a optimistic view of the future, because I feel like we as leaders for so long have been saying, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I want you to be enthusiastic, but I also need you to be realistic. And now it's time to maybe change the message a little bit. And so I'm curious about how you're doing that with your team, with your staff.
Well, first of all, my staff was absolutely incredibly supportive, even from the beginning. They understood when we had to go under furlough because nobody had any idea what was going on in this world way back a year ago. And they said, okay, we'll do that. But then as things started evolving, then they wanted more information. And then when we were able to bring them back, again, compliments of some support, the PPP plan, various other gifts and grants that we were able to collect, then we would come back. And then we were making plans 1 show at a time, which was hard, but at least they were doing something that they loved, which is the creation of theater. Again, this last few months when we were able to think ahead, what is 21, 22 going to be like? What is 22, 23 going to be like? Then we're seeing an invigoration of energy. I think the one struggle that we still continue to have is that we're not as big a staff as we were. Natural attrition, people just left to go to school or do other things. And so it's like, well, they're looking around and saying, I don't want to do what we did before with the less staff that we have, because we were working 60 hours a week then. And I'm trying to, help them adjust and say, well, maybe there's things we don't need to really do. We just liked doing, or it was fun to do, but is it valuable to do? And the other thing is we also learned, thank goodness, we do not need to be a 65-hour work week in order for it to be a real work week. We've all been in that situation where you worked only 40 hours that week because you took 3 days off. And that's not a sensible life balance thing. And again, something that came out of this whole mess was a realization, let's balance our lives better.
That's so great. Kurt, I know you have this beautiful building that you get to operate and welcome people to, but it's really the team that brings it to life. It's your program staff, it's your humans that make it such a wonderful and welcoming community space. How are you doing with your staff?
It's a challenge. Like as I talk to peers around the country and in the community, staff are concerned about the future. The whole environment that we live in right now is challenging and has levels of uncertainty. Fortunately, there's a little more optimism on the horizon. But we've done a couple of things. One is that with a smaller staff, we're actually having our administrative staff, almost every employee with just, I think, 2 exceptions, are working on the floor, if you will. And part of it is to greet our visitors and really be connected to visitors in new and rich ways. The other part is to be constantly cleaning the facility, which cleanliness and safety were at the top of a lot of research that was done that visitors were really looking for. We get a lot of kudos from visitors for doing that. But it has allowed, having our staff out on the floor that much, a staff person in every gallery, essentially, a greeter at the door to check temperatures and a health screening. It has connected us back to our core audience in really vibrant ways, I would say. We have a better understanding. You know, our grant writer, for example, feels, he said, he feels he has a much better sense of what we do and what the outcomes are of what we do since he's been talking to so many visitors. We also see, and this is a national trend, we're seeing a much more diverse audience coming into the Science Center right now. So it's allowing us to learn more about audiences that we have not been able to reach as robustly as we are now. So we're trying to learn from that. This phased reopening plan has allowed staff to at least know that there are next steps, that we have thought about what it's going to be like to get back to some kind of new normal, that it's not just one step at a time. We have a multi-phase plan that will get us back to where we're going. And spirits are lifted as we start hiring more staff, and as we go into the busy season with summer, our staff love working with people. So the thought of having more people and campers in the building is invigorating right now.
Kurt, I love that, like, the reminder to all reconnect with our mission. It's funny, but until you just said that, like, I hadn't been able to name that as something that's been missing, because it's been do, and go, and very tactical decisions. It was interesting, you know, Bravo's mission is the cultural sector, a strong and healthy, vibrant cultural sector. But we haven't been able to go to performances, and we haven't been able to support our community in the same way. And on Friday night, I went to the most beautiful performance of the ballet outside at the Waterworks Park Amphitheater. And I see Blair on this call, and I'm calling her out only to say it was such a gift to the community to be able to gather back together again with arts and culture at the center. And for me, that was a reminder of our mission. Kurt, I think that's what you're saying about your staff, like really seeing the people and remembering why you're there. And David, having live audiences. And I'm sure every person on this call has had those moments where you've reconnected with your why a little. And I just think that that's, I hadn't been able to name it until you just said that, but that really resonates with me. And I'm glad that your staff is feeling that too. So I'm going to ask two last questions, and then we'll go to our breakout rooms. One is, what's still keeping you up at night? What is the thing that's worrying you? And, you know, maybe just pick one. You don't have to go through the whole laundry list. Maybe just pick one of the things that's keeping you up at night. And then the other question is, what are you most excited about? What are you like, how are you going to know that we've gotten through this, and it's not a light at the end of the tunnel anymore? We're pretty well out of the tunnel. So I'll let either of you jump in, and you can start with either question.
Well, I'll jump into what keeps me up at night, and it's just what is the speed of demand and acceptance, and the willingness of the audience to participate, because all the safety protocols and all the practices and all the planning and all the metrics doesn't do anything if somebody doesn't really want to walk in that door. And so I worry about that. And most recently, I worry about the mask debate, this vaccine versus mask, and how that's going to impact where people are, what they're willing to do. Fortunately, I'm kicking the can down the road till September when we come back indoors, but it's a big concern right now, because it's not as clear and precise and quantifiable as I would like. So that's what's keeping me up at night. So I'll let Kurt answer whatever question he wants to.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's knowing when to make the investment back to full or near full operations. You know, do you wait for the audience to show up before you invest, or do you invest in advance of the audience so that you're prepared for them? And I think we're erring on the side of investing in advance and getting staffed up with the hopes that we'll have a good return on that investment this summer. And I would say, as simple as it sounds, but I echo what David says, the mask debate this summer is going to be really tough on us. And we are going to require masks through the summer, as far as our plans are right now. And we think that that's going to cause us some real difficulty with audiences.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's going to be a challenge, and it's too bad that there's not. Okay, maybe we don't need a crystal ball anymore. Maybe we just need a silver bullet. Maybe we just need an answer. We don't, we don't need to know all of the things. We just need to know maybe this one thing. But I think that's something that a lot of organizations and certainly the community at large is going to be wrestling with. So hopefully there's misery loves company. I mean, I'm pulling out all the platitudes this morning, but maybe there's some way that we can collaborate together as a community and come up with some best practices as we go. We have about a couple minutes left. I do want to end on a high note and what you're just really most looking forward to, and kind of what's that trigger for you? What's that moment where you're going to realize, oh my gosh, we did it?
Well, I could, I'll say, I'm so optimistic. That's the nature of a nonprofit executive director, is we're just eternal optimists. I'm so optimistic, I never thought that we wouldn't make it. I didn't know what the condition would be like on the other side, but I've never questioned whether we would make it or not. I do, for myself, am counting on the day that we actually have people sitting side by side without a mask watching a show. And that's not to say, I know there are people that are going to prefer to wear masks on a regular basis. They just have a cough, they're going to stay at home, they're going to wear a mask for themselves and to protect their community. And I think that's totally socially acceptable. I have no problems with that. But the others that are willing to sit side by side, share an experience together, and laugh out loud and be understood, and smile, that's when I consider we've gotten onto the other side.
Now I'm looking forward to that too, David.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to that. I think one of the things that we've learned about cultural organizations is that we're not just community participants, but we're community builders. And having community come together and be together is so important. What I'm looking forward to is using in the future some of the things that we've learned during COVID. So as an example, I mentioned how our staff has been really connected to the visitors in robust ways. How do we carry that forward and make that a part of our regular experience and treat our visitors as fully as we are right now when we're at full operations? So we've actually learned some things during the crisis. And we've gone through lists of what we want to carry forward in the new operation. So there is a little bit of a silver lining through this whole thing.
I would like to say one last thing, Sally, is just to share one quick moment commercial for this group, is the idea, how many times have we known companies and nonprofits and organizations and arts that failed because of bad leadership, or failed because of bad management, or failed because of a bad board or something like that. And this particular thing that set us apart was the fact that none of us caused this. And the idea that we were not alone. We were not the sole singular arts organization or the sole singular nonprofit that was failing because of something beyond our control. The whole community was together, and sometimes we just desperately needed to know there was somebody else who could share our pain because they were experiencing it too. So I just wanted to put a plug in for community gathering, even with Zoom.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your experience and helping people see that a cultural organization is just like every other organization. We have the same challenges and the same opportunities. And I have had the pleasure of working with both of you for the last 18 months and beyond. And I am truly inspired by what you have been able to do, and the perseverance and flexibility and innovation. And I always learn something from you, even just this morning in this brief time together. So thanks for taking the time, and thanks everybody for giving us the space.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Boy, I, as per usual, is taking down a bunch of comments, and I love how can we all reconnect to our mission in new ways. And I love a purpose. And I just think that's such a wonderful way to frame, because you're right. Every single one of you on this call, the do, and the work that you've put in has been tremendous. But I think getting back to that core of why, not just for maybe your boards or for your staff, but for you as leaders and professionals, I think that is such a powerful thing to allow ourselves the time to find a way to reconnect. So I loved that. Also loved Kurt, how you said, our arts and culture, we're not just contributors, we are community builders. And I loved how you framed that. And I think that is obviously so true. And I think about all the ways that arts and culture have been infused within the organizations, even here on this call today, and all of the other ways that I'm, really looking forward to seeing even deeper connections between the arts and culture community and all of our partners in the human service space and in the health space and the environmental space. And I do have a little bit of eternal optimism, David, as well. But I see that more and more, and I get more and more excited to find ways for those connections, because I think you're right. It is a core element to community building, and so we might as well do it with one another too in the nonprofit space. So, Sally, as always, really appreciate your willingness to help lead a conversation with such dynamic and thoughtful community leaders. So thanks to Kurt and David. I'm going to pull up real quick with the help of Barb, the magic behind the Zoom window here. We would love if you can please hang on with us for about 20 more minutes. Would love a chance for you all to connect in community, as was talked about today, in small group breakouts. Really just ending or taking the last two questions that Sally posed to Kurt and David around, what really gives you the most energy right now? And then what is really keeping you up at night? Of course, knowing that many of you, in fact, most of you were still doing programming, some of you, were still open, but what does that look like as you re-engage or as you re-emerge as an organization? If you can do that, then we'll pull you back together. Would love you to share some of those thoughts in the chat when you come back. We continue to want to support you in the best ways possible. And this would be really helpful to us, both thinking about resources we can bring in future conversations. So you will be asked to join a breakout room. Please, again, if you have some time, please do that. And then really think through these two questions. What are you most excited about? What worries you? What's keeping you up at night? And just have a conversation in community with colleagues in the sector. I would love it, as you guys come back, if there are things in the chat that you could share that you were, wrestling with or what was exciting you. Truly wanting to help be supportive of what we might be able to do, whether it's the resources or other conversations or things like that. So I'd love to, you can either share since nobody else is in, or if you feel comfortable putting in the chat, that would be great.
Well, as we were closing, we were talking about the energy that the pandemic situation created, where everybody kind of came together and stepped up to the plate. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to lose that. We want to continue to have that synergy and kind of that, one for all for one mentality. So that was something David kind of touched on.
Mm-hmm. That's great. As people, hi Cynthia and Tony, good to see you. I saw you were hanging out in a room by yourselves, chatting away. So.
Yeah, and I accidentally cut us out of our room with 30 seconds left, Tony. I'm sorry about that.
He's like, I'm tired of him.
Did you cut Tony off, Cynthia? Is that what happened?
As soon as you sent the little warning, she bailed as quick as she
out.
could.
She's like, I do not agree.
Yeah, but I was just gonna finish, Tony, saying that the AmeriConnect CARES Act, I think that they are working to try and come up with some long-term projects that will
with you guys.
Yeah. Great. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with the conversation and being in community with one another. As people were coming back, heard, this idea about how can we maintain or maybe even drive deeper this synergy and this togetherness that really the pandemic solidified. I mean, a lot of people really just came together, whether it was you all, I'm looking at all of you, you all shared ideas and resources, and some of you shared staff with one another. And, it's just continues to be inspiring, but how do we leverage all that moving forward? I think is really important. And then some of this ramping up, I think Kurt, this was one of the things that you brought up in the conversation when Sally teed up the question initially about, what is the right answer about investing into staff and what's the timing of that? So how do we ramp back up? How do you get to that place and know? So perhaps some deeper conversations about what the sector could use in terms of resources to get to the place where we need you all to be for your services that you deliver. Would love, if you have anything in particular that you chatted about, would love you to take a moment to drop it in the chat box if you could, about what are you wrestling with right now, if you feel comfortable, or it could be for a friend. You could enter it for a friend if you if you don't want to. I won't attribute it to anybody, but would sure appreciate any insight that you might have so that we can help continue the resources that we bring. But again, thank you for the time. Looking at all of you, get a ton of energy from your work, but oh my goodness, please let us know what we can do to continue to be helpful. Boy, there's a lot that you are leading for all of us. So I'm grateful, continue to be grateful. So I shall let you all refill your coffee. I certainly will be doing that, even though I probably don't need it, for those of you who know me. But either way, I will look forward to seeing you all in June. I hear next month is June, y'all. I just don't even know why it is June. But I certainly hope to see you out and about in this community. And I look forward to the time when we can see smiles through those masks too. So thanks for being with us. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and soak in those sunshine rays.